Well, good morning, everyone. It's the 5th of December, 2022, Monday morning. I have a question for everyone this morning. Is there anything too difficult for God? We're going to cover the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel this morning. I shared with them the devotional on the live stream this morning. The story of the golf shot. If you want to hear it, go to that devotional on Facebook and listen to the story of the golf shot. Well, the Philistines had gathered together in their armies to battle and were gathered together at Succoth, which belonged to Judah, and pitched with Succoth and Azekah in Ephraim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other, and there was a valley between them. And there went up a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose a man for you, and let him come down to me. He's pretty cocky, wasn't he? Can you imagine taking on the Attorney General of the state of Missouri? The whole state of Missouri coming against yours truly. You know, I guess it was really the other way around. Yours truly coming against the whole state of Missouri. But it wasn't just me. It was good Lord coming against them. And the Philistines said, he says, if ye be able to fight with me, to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, shall ye be our servants and serve us? And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephraite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle, and the name of the 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, the next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the eldest followed Saul. 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they, all the men of Israel, were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth the Philistines, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after the manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight for him, for thou art but a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. The servant slew both the lion and the bear. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and as he essayed to go, for he had not proved it, David said, I cannot go with these, I have not proved them. And David put them off him, and he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked around about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcases of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the God saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk in his forehead, and he fell upon the face of the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until thou come to the valley, to the gate of Ekron, and wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shaaraim, even to Gath, even unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistines, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, to Abner, Whose son is this you? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Well, this is quite an account, isn't it? I think it's worth listening to twice. I think it's worth listening to twice. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let him read it as well. But when Mark reads this, think about the fact that God is in total control. You cannot circumvent or thwart God's will.
Next chapter, previous chapter. Chapter 17, 1 Samuel. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle. They gathered together at Shokah, which belonged to Judah, and pitched between Shokah and Azekah, Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the battle of Elah, to the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. There was a battle between them. There went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in the span, with a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. Staff, his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spears had weighed 600 shekels of iron. When bearing a shield went before him, and he stood and cried in the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle array? Am I not a Philistine service to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If you be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants, but I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine. They were dismayed and greatly afraid. And David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. The 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to battle, and the names of his 3 sons that went to battle were Eli, the firstborn, the next unto him, and Ben-dab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. The Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 sheaves unto the captain of their 1,000. And look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and that all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines, and David rose up early in the morning, bought the sheep of the keeper, and took it and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle. Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army, and David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion of the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name, and the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, were sore afraid. The men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that has come up true to fight Israel? As he come up, it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done? The man that killeth the Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall be done to the man that killeth him. Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither, and with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed him before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant keep his father's sheep. There came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and he went out after him, and smote him, and delivered him it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. The servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivereth me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor. He put a helmet of brass upon his head also. He armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he was stayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in his shepherd's bag which he had, even in his scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of fair countenance. The Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air, and the beasts of the field. And said David the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. I will smite thee, and take thy head from thee, and I will give the carcases of the host of the Philistines this day, and the fowls of the air, the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battles of the Lord, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine at his forehead, that the stone stuck to his forehead. And he fell upon his face the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling, with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there is no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until they'll come to the valley, and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shurim, even to the Gath and the Ekron. The children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines. They spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David go forth in the Philistine, he said unto Abner, that captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him, and brought him before Saul, to have the Philistine in his hand. Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy son Jesse the Bethlehemite. Next. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's quite a story, but it's not just a story, it's the truth. It's an actual fact that it happened. God bless.